new innovations happen to be, in many cases, anti-disciplinary, which is a very MIT Media Lab ethos. And that's because the best innovations end up landing somewhere in between. So as Ken was describing, what we do at Ori is a bit of robotics and what Google would do, a little bit of furniture and what IKEA would do, a little bit of what Greystar or Marriott would do on the real estate front, and a little bit of what an architecture firm would do. And that's kind of where the most interesting thing happens. And that's where, you end up creating new business models. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about. But happy to talk more about IKEA, of course. It's always hard to go after Kent because, always such great presentations and so much vision in 20, 30 minutes of content. So it's always hard to go right after. But I'm going to do my best. The only thing you need to know about me, history-wise, very quickly, I was supposed to be a soccer player or football, as we call it, in Europe. I ended up going into a mechanical engineering school. So I ended up dropping my soccer career. I ended up at MIT after my mechanical engineering degree, and in a very MIT Media Lab fashion, Kent put me in charge of the architectural work, even though I was not an architect. I was an engineer, but again, that's a very MIT Media Lab ethos too. And then as we started working on all these ideas, I ended up becoming an entrepreneur with some my co-founders also coming out of the same group. Some of you might know. But I wanted to today, I'm going to share some slides. I'm going to share some content, but my goal is to talk about three things or give you kind of, or address kind of three topics. The first one is how we got started, and how you get innovation started. How do you think about that evolution from you're at the lab, you have an idea, and how you start thinking about commercialization. So trying to put your business hat on, number one. Number two, how do you move from prototype to product? It's very different to build one prototype that has to work once, like the apartment that we built that Ken was showing you, where I was dancing the conga, I don't know, 10 years ago. And there's a big difference between that and thinking about how you build something at a scale, how you build thousands and how you build them so that they work every single time. So the types of challenges are not more difficult or easier, they're just different. And number three, how do you move from product to business? Because you can have a great product, but ideas are only as good as their business model. So I'm going to tell you a bit of the evolution we had. It's been 9 years, working at it and pushing through it. So there's probably content for hours, but I'm going to try to kind of summarize it in kind of on those three topics. As I share my screen here, I think we're gonna take it where Kent left it, which is kind of at the Media Lab, and hopefully, Maita, you can confirm, but you guys see my screen with a big MIT Media Lab, image. Yeah. Great. So I'm gonna kind of take it where Ken left it, and saying, okay, we have all this research at the MIT Media Lab. You can see also a much younger version of myself, 2011. Building one of those initial prototypes of what back then we called the Robo Wall. My first thesis at MIT, led by Ken, was called Robo Wall: From Concept to Reality. And you can see some of those early prototypes. You can even see the wheels of the city car. If you remember the city car, famous project coming out of the City Science Initiative, you can see a wheel from the city car in the background. So that tells you how old this picture is, 2011. And I think as we did all that research, again, coming out 2015, we realized that all these companies that were sponsoring us, none of them was ready to do this type of innovation, because we were a bit of technology, a bit of real estate, a bit of furniture. So that's when we launched Ori as a company. Ori comes from origami. One day over a beer, Kent can tell you the story of our previous name, but Ori is where we kind of landed on the brand. And the question we were asking ourselves, very much inspired by the research at the group, at the City Science Initiative, was around these two key areas of real estate, around sustainability and affordability. And the fact that lack of affordability and lack of sustainability are two of the biggest challenges that real estate is facing. We know it's not affordable for people to live in the places where they want to live. especially young professionals, young people, but also buildings are responsible for 40% of carbon emissions. And most of that comes from the materials that you use to build a building and the operational emissions of, for example, heating and cooling. So what we learned through that research that Ken was describing is that those two problems are actually proportional to the amount of square footage you need to live in. Because the more square footage you have per person, the more rent, the more mortgage, but also the more steel, the more concrete, the more heating and cooling. So that's kind of where that started, with this provocation, which was almost a question. And that was, what if we don't need as much space as we think we need? What if we could change the paradigm of a space by making smaller spaces feel as if they were much, much larger? So in that vision, we started thinking not just about apartments, as Ken was showing, but also, of course, we had ideas for apartments and space on demand, but we also started thinking about other types of spaces. We started thinking about, and again, this was still kind of just coming out of MIT. We started thinking about, well, do we start in apartments? Do we start in hotels? Hotels could be a great application for this, as you can see in the animation. A hotel room that could be a gym, a bedroom, or an office, depending on the time of the day. We thought about bigger apartments. So what about family apartments? Or also, as Ken was showing, what if an apartment could actually be an office space or a gathering space? We started thinking, okay, what if we start in commercial spaces? What if the company, we start with ideas and solutions for making offices much more efficient, where rooms could be created on demand, where you need one room, you need three, or you need four. You could create those rooms as you need them. We even thought about retail. Like, what if you could have a 24/7 usage retail space that could turn into a restaurant at 6 p.m.? What if that restaurant could kind of morph into a bar at 9? And what if the bar could morph into a club at midnight? And then back to the beginning. So that's where we were. We're just studying. We have this tech. We have these prototypes. And we're thinking, like, where do we start? And the one thing that I learned, and for those of you that are entrepreneurial, I really recommend that you get involved with the Martin Trust Entrepreneurship Center at MIT. There's a ton of great resources. And one of the best resources is this framework that they have, which is 24 steps in a very MIT engineering fashion. There's steps for everything. So 24 steps to entrepreneurship. And this is what they call disciplined entrepreneurship. So how you start thinking about the journey of your product. Now, without explaining each step, which again you can do through by getting involved with the Trust Center, the one thing that I learned as I got involved and my team got involved with the Trust Center, with Entrepreneurship Center at MIT, was that, and this is typically not something engineers are comfortable with, but the first thing you have to do is go out there and talk to people. So what we did, again, we have these concepts, makes sense, but we have to understand the market. So we went out there. We started looking at studio apartments, and we started looking at people living in apartments like this one, in places like Boston. And we started asking them, like, what are your struggles? What you don't like about the unit? What do you like? And by doing all that research and talking to more than 100 people, we found out that there were 3 things that people were about every single time. And again, this is us trying to connect the research with a very clear need in the market that we could turn into a business. And what we found was, first, that, and I'm curious how many of you have lived in studios and if you share these problems, but the 3 were lack of separation of space. So the main reason why couples don't want to move to studios, because it's only kind of one space. It's hard to have 2 activities happening at the same time. The second problem was lack of a proper living area or office space, in the sense that your studio feels like your bedroom. So if you want to work from there or socialize, you're kind of doing it from your bedroom, from your bed. And then last but not least, lack of storage. And an interesting thing, when you see problems like that, and when the problems are acute, you tend to find hacks. You tend to find the market trying to hack solutions around. And what we found is that, for the lack of separation, we were finding these partition walls that have become incredibly popular in the last few years. They're called junior bedrooms. So you put a partition wall, and now you call that it's a studio. You call it a junior 1-bedroom. For the lack of proper living area, we saw solutions like Murphy beds, which some of you might have tried before. Great for occasional use, not so great for daily use. And then for the lack of a storage problem, we found storage lockers in some of these buildings. We found walk-in closets in studios, which don't make that much sense, because walk-in closet takes so much space and it's only used 20 minutes a day. So we saw all of those solutions, and we said, okay, what if we could take the framework of technology that we have and develop a solution that could substitute all those problems for something that could give you what you need on demand. So this was the example of the very first product that we came up with out of MIT. It's called the Ori Pocket Studio, and it was very much grounded in that research. The idea that you could have a system that could divide the space, separate the space, a system that could give you a walk-in closet when you need it, and a system that could give you either a bedroom or a large living area office at the press of a button. So even this product that might feel like a bit random, well, a wall that moves, it was very much inspired by those three problems and solving those three problems kind of straight on. Now, that was us with a very product mindset, thinking about problems and trying to come up with a solution using all the research that we had done at MIT. The next thing we had to do was test things. And this is an apartment in the Seaport in Boston, the very first Ori apartment. It was an Airbnb. We installed it there. It was very rough, still not the right industrial design, but we put it there. We put it in an apartment, and very quickly, without being scared about what people would think, we basically started having people stay there. 20-year-old young singles, 80-year-old couples, and we started learning a lot. And that's an important learning from entrepreneurship, which is you're going to learn more in 5 minutes of conversations around a real thing than in 5 months of sketches on a whiteboard. So getting yourself out as quickly as you can. Not only that, but even our teammates, we stay there. This is myself with my wife, spending a couple of nights. You can see a time lapse, so trying to understand how we would use the space, the separation of the space for the couple, how we would interact with the system. So we actually use this again for our own use, but also for third-party people just staying on it as an Airbnb. So again, this was all about testing and learning in the wild as quickly as we could in a real market environment. You can see the dinner party that we threw there. Now, continuing here, this evolved quite a bit, and it took us to, this was our first promo video for that product. So as you can see, the industrial design, everything got to the next level. This is the Ori Pocket Studio as we know it. In order to build this, of course, now it was not just about industrial design, it was about the right user experience, app control, voice control, and even more importantly, and this is kind of a segue into going from prototype to product, the most important thing was how can we design these things for safety and reliability. So we had to figure out all the safety features. We had to take all these products through UL certifications. If you're not familiar with them, UL, Underwriter Laboratories, it's one of the most prominent safety certifications. You open your microwave or your fridge, you might find a stamp. We had to take these products to the same regulation, long process. Same thing for reliability. So key questions we would get, like what happens if the power goes out? So making sure that you could manually move the systems, how you could design them for 20, 30,000 cycles. So we had to work through all that in order to have a product that was finished. Now, this is where we start, again, transitioning from we get started, we develop a product, but then we realize we need to sell that product. And there's two key strategies. You either sell it to consumers or you sell it to developers. And what we found very quickly is that consumers, typically, when you think about small apartments and specifically studios, you typically rent an apartment like that. You don't buy it. So that means that your go-to natural market, it's what we would call the B2B2C market, which is you sell to developers, but at the end of the day, the consumers are the ones using your products. So that's when we went into the multifamily industry market. For those of you not familiar with that terminology, multifamily, it's an industry, it's rentals. It's basically rental buildings. Every time you see a rental building owned, managed by Avalon, Greystar, Related, and all these kind of brands, that's a multifamily rental building, which means that a developer owns the building and it rents all the individual units to people like us. That's what we realized the market was. And we also realized that as a company or as a technology, there were different layers. There was the layer of furniture and components, the gear, the systems that make the spaces feel better. Then there's the apartments that you can design around them. There's the floors that you can create with these new apartments. And then there's the buildings that you could design around them. Of course, the vision for us was always, well, what if we could have a building fully optimized around Ori, which is what Ken was implying and showing in his presentation. But then we also realized that without perfecting the first layer, without perfecting the products and the technology, it was impossible to really launch or pitch a building concept, which you'll see in a moment how that's where we're going now. But it was impossible to do it without having real proof and real implementations in the market of the former. So what we did is we built a portfolio, an ecosystem of systems, which used to be our product. This is our product. That's how we used to call it. This is our product. It's our systems. You have a pocket closet, which is a closet on demand. That's what you couldn't see because it got stuck on Ken's video, but you get a bit of the sense. It creates a walk-in closet on demand. The pocket office, the same idea for offices, the pocket studio you just saw, and then all the cloud bed systems, which were the beds that drop from the ceiling. Now, until not so long ago, this was our product in the sense that we were going to developers and we're telling them, this is our ecosystem, this is our portfolio of solutions, tell us which one you need, and we're going to be a vendor to you, we're going to install those, and then your residents will take advantage of that. Now, what we've learned, and this is a bit of and I'm going to translate into another presentation, is that in the last few months, we had a bit of I would say an epiphany moment, as a business. And this is kind of part of the last part of the presentation, which is how do we evolve, from a product to a business? Because again, an idea is only as good as its business model. And as we perfected those products, for the last 12 months, I've been asking myself the following question. And the question is, why would the same exact product, the same exact bed, for example, cloud bed, would be generating an amazing financial return in this place, in this building, and then in another building, the same exact product would be generating zero return? And the answer to that, which again, we always thought about in the past, but the answer to that comes very much related to this comment I made at the beginning about IKEA, and also inspired by a movie. So I don't know how many of you like movies, but there's a movie I love, and it's called The Founder. How many of you have watched that movie? Raise your hand. It's about the McDonald's story. Anybody? The Founder? One person only? Well, you have entertainment for the weekend. Please watch that movie. Super fun and super interesting because everybody knows McDonald's, but not everybody knows the story of McDonald's. I'm going to give you one spoiler, which is that in the middle of the movie, there's a scene where the founder of McDonald's is sharing all the numbers of the business with this investment banker. And the investment banker looks at all the numbers and stares very seriously at the founder and tells him, you don't realize you're in the wrong business. You're not in the hamburger business. You're in the real estate business. So substitute hamburger for furniture, and that's the same kind of epiphany we've been going through. That we always saw as the vision, but we realized that now that the products are much more mature, the way Ori as a company makes a difference and the way the business model becomes more attractive is by really embracing the idea of becoming a next generation kind of real estate company. And that's the last thing I'm going to show you and kind of give you a sense of what that means. So I'm going to share this other deck here, which hopefully you'll see with a big building and an Ori logo on it. So if you don't see it, you let me know. But the idea is like how using technology, instead of thinking about technology as something that, for example, IKEA would sell as an afterthought and as a furniture system, what if we could think about these systems not as the final product, but as the secret sauce that allows you to create the real product, which is apartments. We call it a new development model for more attainable housing. We know how much pressure there is about affordability. So what if we could create affordability by changing the paradigm of space design? So now what's happening in the market, it's actually the perfect storm. Because if any of you is related to real estate right now in the room, you will see the two parts of this equation. The first part, all of you are feeling. The first part is the fact that you cannot afford to rent, Most residents cannot afford to rent, or you're spending an enormous amount of your income, and especially being students, on rent. I know how that feels. We're all there. Now, the other side of it is really what many people don't understand, which is that developers are not building more because it doesn't make economic sense. And you cannot ask anybody to be losing money as their job. So we have this issue that residents cannot afford to rent, developers cannot afford to build. Of course, there's a lever, which we've always played with, which is the size lever, that really makes the difference. If you can make units smaller, you're going to make them more affordable because the biggest driver of price is size. And that's been in some way proven in the market by more conventional concepts like micro units. So for the last 10 years, you might have heard there's been a bunch of micro unit buildings coming along in the market in the US, in different cities, US and Canada. And the interesting thing about these buildings is that they've performed pretty well, because by being smaller units, you can offer cheaper rents, but also the developer can make more per square foot. So they have introduced this interesting math, which is how do you provide more affordability while increasing profit? The problem is that these buildings suffer from lack of imagination. And these smaller units, even though they're cheaper, they have a pretty subpar experience. If you look at these rooms, it's a bed. It's basically a bedroom, and it might be fun for a few months and for somebody that is really like a very niche kind of market. But the moment you start thinking about scaling that idea, the moment you think about bringing investors to build more buildings like that, the moment you think about regulatory pushback that could happen because cities don't want to see people in shoe boxes, that's where that industry has gotten a little bit stuck. And the other reason it's gotten stuck, showing the Murphy bed again, is that, believe it or not, the Murphy bed, which is the poster child of space efficiency, was invented, I know you can guess, but 1912. The first mass-produced car was invented 3 years earlier than that. So when you think about cars and how they have evolved in the last 100 plus years, mobility as a whole, not just cars, mobility, on demand, autonomous, electric, and you think about Murphy beds, still the same, maybe with an Italian look and a bit fancier, but still the same basic technology. So that's where we come into play. So the idea was, okay, it's not about the systems themselves, which you see on the left. It's about the apartments that you can create with those systems, and how we can go from a division of micro units as a very limited kind of solution to something much more aspirational, which we like to call expandable apartments, ORI apartments. Again, units that are smaller, more affordable, but also aspirational. Now, pitching a story for whole ORI buildings, even though we've toyed with that idea for a long time, and I still remember sketching some of that with Ken back in the day, it was hard until you can show the industry that you have something, you have a technology that actually works. So now with 1,500 apartments that we have with this technology, like the one in the image, which is the one in New York, but you have plenty more, we've shown that residents love these solutions. The NPS scores that you see are Apple, Airbnb type NPS scores. These are net promoter scores. When you look at multifamily and residential buildings, typically are a 20 or a 10. So 60 is a really good score. As a reminder, NPS scores goes from -100 to 100. So that's why 60 is a really good score. But also the reliability, the safety, all of that had to be proven. And then without getting very technical, for those of you that don't care so much about real estate economics, we've realized that that's where the game is. The game of ORI is not to provide a robotic furniture piece that makes a space better. The goal of ORI is to allow you as a developer to make an apartment smaller, make it more affordable, and at the same time make more money. So these are two case studies. These are buildings, real buildings in the country right now. One of them is in Arlington, one of them is in Tampa, but you can see the key math. Like you see apartments, in this case, 22% smaller, 9% cheaper, 20% higher price per square foot. On the right, 33% smaller, 7% cheaper, 40% higher price per square foot. That is the math that an unlock in technology like ORI provides from a business standpoint. It's all about what value you generate for the industry. So you need to quantify that. And the value we generate is that we are able to provide more affordability, lower chunk rent, while increasing the dollar per square foot, which creates what I would call a development model. So the idea that ORI really as a company, it's in the business of designing floors and designing buildings that have apartments that are 40% smaller than the average apartments in the country, 10% cheaper, 50% higher returns. Now, the way this will look like, if you were to compare this, and again, we're getting deep into the economics, but this is what you will realize as you're launching your ventures, is that it's a numbers game. You need your user experience, you need people to love that, but you need to figure out what is the math behind it, especially if you're selling to businesses. So you need to quantify the return on investment. And the way we quantify that, without getting too deep into real estate economics, is by increasing the development yields. For those of you that don't know what a development yield is, it basically like when you put money on a savings account, you get a yield. And that yield today might be 3, 4, 5%. Well, when you invest in buildings, it's the same thing. If you invest in buying an existing building, you will get a yield. It's called a cap rate. And typically in a city like Boston, that yield will be 5%. If you build your own building and you spend the money on building a building, you will get another yield. But because the risk of building a building is so much higher than the risk of buying an existing building, your yield has to be significantly higher. And that's what's called the development spread. So when you look at the building on the left, which is a traditional building, when you run through all the math, you will see how it has a 5.5% yield, whereas the Ori building, applying this math that I was describing, has a 6.74 yield. This might sound very boring, but the reality is that until we understood this, we were playing kids' games. Until we understood that what developers are buying is development spreads, you can have the fanciest technology, the fanciest innovation, but if you try to sell to developers without understanding these numbers, you're dead in the water. It took us 9 years, so hopefully it takes you less, but that's kind of how you start to think about the math. You have to, this expression from Picasso, I think it was, which is that you have to learn the rules like a master so you can break them like an artist or something like that. That's the same thing. As you're trying to innovate in an industry, even though it might sound like the most boring industry in the world, like real estate, like you have to get deep. You have to understand it the way developers understand it, because you're going to end up realizing that you're selling them not a bet, you're selling them development spreads. You're selling them percentages. That's what they're buying. Now, again, this gets pretty dense, but basically where we are right now is that we are looking at these Ori branded buildings, which, as you can see on the left, would be buildings that are, again, 100% design units around Ori, working with some limited geographic partners. And the part on the right, which you don't need to see all the details, is how we are identifying the sites, the markets, and the sub-markets. No surprise, the higher the construction cost, as you can see on the table, and the higher the rent per square foot, the more impact, the more development spread, the more yield that we give a building. Now, one video I'm going to show you right here, just to make it more real, I'm going to show you what an Ori building looks like. So you've seen plenty of examples, you've seen the products, but let me show you how some of these apartments look like. So this is the optimized Ori studio. This is between 220 and 300 square feet, so really small, but it's designed to feel much bigger. You can see how it's furnished or unfurnished. And at the press of a button, what you do in a space like this is you go from complete living room or office space, you go into a bedroom, and then at the press of another button, you see how you also get into a walk-in closet. So at this size of an apartment, we're still looking mostly at young professionals. We're looking at single people, but we're looking at how they can make a 250 square feet apartment feel like a 400 square feet apartment, with all the luxuries that a 600 square foot apartment would have, like an empty, a big living room, a walk-in closet, and then making sure that the rest of the apartment, has at least all the standards, all the standard bathrooms, standard kitchens, standard washer dryers. That's what an Ori studio is. So again, the systems are the secret sauce. The product is really the apartments. This is an Ori one bedroom, 300 to 400 square feet. So much smaller than your average one bedroom. And you will understand how we make it a one bedroom in a moment. Now, on the left, you see a walk-in closet. So the same idea, we bring walk-in closets to very small apartments. On the right, you see how, a bedroom space can actually turn into a big open area, or it can, transform into an office space too. Now, the bedroom now, it's in the window area, which is important. We see a lot of concepts where the bedrooms are getting insetted and dark. So we like to keep the bedroom in the window area. And then at the press of a button, and this one Ori solution that you guys might have not seen yet, but we are developing as we speak, you basically create a full acoustic partition that makes what traditionally would be a studio, makes it into a real full one bedroom, where the bedroom has windows and it's complete partition from the rest of the space. So now you're introducing couples into the mix. It's not just singles anymore. Now you're introducing couples into the mix. And as I said before, bathrooms, kitchens, we still keep the same kind of standardization there, because we know there's much more code when it comes to those areas. I'm going to show you a couple more examples just to inspire you for bigger units. So now we get into a 1+1. So now you might be talking about a couple that just had a baby. They're trying to figure out where to put the baby for the first, 12 months. They don't have an extra bedroom. Grandparents are coming to visit. So now what you do is you take a one-bedroom apartment at a very small size, less than 500 square feet. You create a home office, complete home office. So some of you might be working from home. You can make the master bedroom into an office. You still have a walk-in closet. And then if you go back to the living room, voila, now you actually have an extra room. Now you can turn a one bedroom into a two-bedroom apartment with this, wall partition that I was showing you. As always, kitchens, bathrooms, we like to be fairly boring there. because we know that most of the innovation happens in the open space. And then last one example, now you're talking about a bigger family. Now it's a 2-bedroom corner unit. You can furnish the empty space however you want. But when it comes to the master bedroom, same idea. Your master bedroom, why it should be a bedroom when you're only sleeping half of the day or 8 hours a day? What if it could be a home office? And what if you could have a walk-in closet? And then the same idea, wrapping up here, it's going to connect to the second bedroom. So in a second bedroom with a family, you want more flexibility. So what we do is we bring a storage into that building, into a unit, but then we allow you to customize the rest of the apartment. So that's how an Ori building starts feeling like. The last thing I want to show you here is the two strategies that we realize we need to have, because we realize that as a business, there's an Ori building, which we know not every developer is going to be ready to do. We're talking about a very conservative industry. So this is kind of for the very select few. And then what we do is try to find ways to still have more conventional conservative developers work with us. And that's what we call the Powered by Ori Studios strategy, which is basically a traditional building that has a percentage of that building, 20, 30, 40% as Ori Studios. And that's your way to, in some way, push the limit, but at the same time, give an option for the more conservative players in the industry to still apply your technologies. So in a nutshell, and I could share more with you, but I think this is kind of a good place to wrap it up and open it up for questions. In any journey, entrepreneurial journey, first of all, and I didn't even talk about that, but for those of you that have that entrepreneurial blood, you have to fall in love with a problem. Like, don't start a company because it's cool to start a company, because you're always only going to find a world of suffering. It's very, very hard. And the only thing that keeps pushing you is the fact that there's a problem that really you think should be solved and nobody's solving. That's where you have to start, find that problem. And then, it's really about understanding that, especially if you're doing research, there's going to be that initial phase where you think about, like those first steps of really talking to the market and understanding the market really well. Then you're going to have to turn your prototype into a product and think about how to make it scalable. And then last but not least, you're going to have to figure out how to create a real business model out of it. Because even the best, coolest idea with the wrong business model, it's worth nothing. So anyway, let me open it up for questions, but, glad to be here today.
Oh. Here, Gustav. You can talk maybe.
Yeah. Thank you for first of all, that was a great presentation. I'm wondering, so with this product, are you thinking about selling units or just renting them? I'm thinking about maintenance and like the very real issues of living in a space like this for a long time, years, right? And the issues that would come up with that.
Yeah. So the way we think about this is that we are not a vendor of furniture, but we're not a developer either. So we're somewhere in between. And I think one business model to understand that might be helpful is the Marriott model. I don't know how many of you are familiar with how Marriott works, but Marriott does not own any other hotels. They might own 7 of the 7,000 hotels that they have. But what they do is they create a brand where they provide developers a toolkit to create what a Marriott building would be. Now, that's where the comparison ends, because the Marriott building is really based around different concepts than ours. But for us, it's really around the idea of saying, well, the local developers know the sites, know the projects in every kind of jurisdiction. And what we do is we bring them a few things. We bring them the architectural guidelines so that they know what the perfect Ori apartments are, and we help them do the Tetris with those floor plans. Number 2, we bring them the products themselves, of course, because that's the differentiation by manufacturing them, shipping them, installing them. Number 3, we give them the marketing guidelines and the branding, even the website, so that they can market these buildings in the way they should be marketed, because we become experts at that. And number 4, more specific to your question, we also give them the support programs and the maintenance so that these systems, first of all, they're designed for 15, 20 years of use at least, but we also give them the support so that if there's any malfunction, any failure, and a system has to be fixed, that's also part of the deal. So in some way, you're giving developers a package, but that becomes scalable because if you want to scale as a furniture company, the problem is that developers are not building what they should be building. So you lack control, hence your solution comes short. If you try to scale as a developer, now you're going too slow because now every market, every city is very, very different. So it's all about finding that in between where you are scaling by working with a lot of developers and bringing them the tools to build this new type of building.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Have you also collaborated with cases of adaptive reuse? Because, I mean, you were talking about developers that are creating new buildings and, yeah, so creating the floor plans from scratch. But I think there is probably also a lot of potential in terms of maybe mixed use and especially in adaptive reuse buildings. So in that case, your product could actually maximize even more the use.
That's a great question. The answer is yes. But it's a bit of a double-edged sword because like in new development, the good thing is that you get a lot of freedom to design what you should, but then new development takes a long time. With adaptive reuse and conversions, it's kind of the opposite problem. You get much less control because you are playing with some existing conditions, some columns, some structure, but at the same time, it's faster because now you don't have to build a building. And in some cases, it's cheaper because if you're buying an existing office building, you're going to buy it for cents on the dollar. Now, what we've seen in our case is that for office to residential conversions, we don't yet have a very mature offering because most of the office conversions that we see are very deep floor plans, very deep buildings. So what happens with those buildings is that the types of units, residential units you create end up being actually too large. And our whole magic is that we can make small feel large. So the moment the units are already large, our impact is much more muted. It doesn't mean there's no examples, but it's much more of a one-off basis. The type of conversion that is very interesting to us, it's the hotel to residential conversion because hotel rooms are by definition smaller than residential units. So if your typical studio is 450 square feet, your typical hotel room might be 250 square feet. So in some ways, if you are converting a hotel room, you kind of have your perfect building already built for you. The reason it's hard to penetrate that one is because hotels had a bit of a crisis in 2020, but they bounced back. So there's not like while office buildings are being sold for cents on the dollar, you don't see so many hotel buildings that are being sold like that. So that's why we haven't been able to really capture that much of that. But I think it's definitely a very interesting idea because the most sustainable building and the cheapest building is the one that it's already built.
Here.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. I really appreciated seeing how there were different configurations for especially like numbers of room and number of people that live in these spaces. And I guess one thing I was curious or wanted to talk about was navigating sort of like these social negotiations as the space shifts and morphs. Like how do you resolve like that's not word. The contested use of the space itself in terms of like its like how social it becomes, or for example, like I want to take a nap and then in the same room, like someone like my partner, for example, would want to work. Like how does that work?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question that I've gotten often at the same time as somebody that has been living with these solutions in 1 and 2 bedrooms. Like I never had one of those arguments yet, so that's a good sign. But I think the way you solve that, I think that argument is very legit, specifically when you thought about our original work that only showed studios. So as we're looking at a small studio apartment that goes from bedroom to living room, which is mostly focused on young professionals and singles, like that's the people that rent those apartments. As you started stretching that concept to couples, for example, then you started creating this social conflict, around, well, if somebody wants to go to bed and somebody wants to, use the sofa, like you cannot do both. And the way we've been solving that is by introducing the next floor plans. And that's why, if you remember, the one I showed for the one bedroom, it was still a very small apartment, almost a studio size. But by introducing that partition system, which, you know, it's kind of that acoustic wall, that's how we make sure that if two people is the typical use that you would have for that space, there's always the optionality to have two separated spaces. But then when both of the people are actually doing the same activity and they're kind of combining, now getting rid of that wall allows you to get the most of the space. Because what happens today when you are, let's say, a couple and you live in a one-bedroom apartment, that's kind of what you're doing, which is like one has the bedroom, one has the living room, and you always can create that type of privacy and can have two activities at the same time. But when both of you are doing the same activity, you're both constrained to having to choose one of the spaces. Whereas the idea is that if you're not using the bedroom and you just have some friends over, you should be able to get rid of that bedroom and create a bigger space. So the way, again, we've been now solving for those conflicts that are created every time you add a person is by realizing that there's no one size fits all. There's different typologies. We call them the big six, because there's six that we call. There's the Ori studio, the Ori junior one bedroom, the Ori one bedroom, and that's how we kind of tackle you know, the idea of different renter households.
Please go ahead.
I'm thinking about personalization of the space. So when people are kind of like pulling in decorations and things like that, I imagine that might get in the way. Is there a way of kind of addressing that issue?
Yeah, so great question too, and something we thought a lot about. So we can think of personalization a few ways. The first one, and this will give you a little bit of behind the scenes of some design decisions that we made. When it comes to multifamily rentals, the first thing we learned, one of the first things we learned as we started deploying, for example, our cloud bed systems, is that because of that personalization desire that everybody wants their space to feel different, we actually had to tone down the industrial design of our products, which breaks my heart, because one of the coolest industrial designs we've ever had for a product was the one that Ken did for the cloud bed with the Scandinavian kind of slats and design, one of my favorite designs. But what we found out is that it was a love it or hate it type situation for residents. Like some people and some developers would absolutely love it. I would fall in love with it because, again, it's a Scandinavian look. It has a couch inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright kind of design. It's like very kind of heightened design. But then there'll be other residents that will be like, I want to personalize it. So then what we realized is that for the newer designs, we had to make it much more muted so that it felt like almost like kitchen cabinetry or things that already come with the apartment. So that was number one, making the systems themselves try to have a language that, without feeling just white and cheap, but, you know, feeling a little bit elevated, but feeling really embedded in the apartment as something that comes with it. The second thing is the learning that we had, which is that we don't want to fully furnish apartments. So we call this concept semi-furnished. And that's the idea that the Ori system themselves do introduce some components of furniture, specifically the beds. But the rest of the furniture, we like to make it free for the resident to choose. Now, in studios that are the smallest, admittedly, there's less optionality, because you have the bed and you have the closet and the things you can do around it, apart from the design, the paintings, you can do the coffee table, you can do the rack, you can do less, but that's fine because in a studio apartment, people are more transient. As you go to the bigger apartments, you probably notice, but a lot of the stuff that we're showing in the animations are, you know, third-party furniture. So you do get one or two implementations. You get the walls, the closet, and maybe one of the beds, but the rest of the space is designed so that you could put whatever furniture you want. And that's how we solve for that kind of need for personalization. By number one, making the systems embed into the typical, you know, rental building architecture. And secondly, by allowing as much flexibility as we can so that people can put third-party furniture around it.
Thank you so much.
I think I just wanted to ask about, you mentioned that you have 1,500 apartments now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So over the course of maybe several years, I'm guessing, what are the challenges that you have seen from, you know, when you started to implement, you know, the first, let's say, the first 100 apartments to now, to today, and are developers jumping and wanting to work with you? I mean, from the economics standpoint, I don't see why developers wouldn't want to be knocking on your door. And if they're not, what are the challenges there? Why are they not?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of questions. A more specific challenges to operationalizing this concept, but also why does it take so long, to get developed? Like 1,500 apartments, it's a good number, but it's the tip of the iceberg. It's a small number. That is the reality, and that's because this is an industry that takes time to adopt. Now, when it does, it's unstoppable. But even when the numbers make all the sense in the world, what you will find about real estate is that nobody wants to be first. Nobody wants to be last either, but everybody wants to be second, third, fourth. So when we start pitching even things like an ORI building, which make all the sense in the world from a economics standpoint and from a just de-risking standpoint, because the technology is already mature, even then, it's a very few developers that have the guts to do it. So that's what takes time, that's why it's like years in the making, to get to 1,500. But at some point in that journey, and I think we're getting very, very close to it, you do hit a tipping point. When you become more of a standard, when developers now, they're not like, oh, these new guys from MIT, but they're like, oh, you've been around for this long, you have this amount of apartments. So every new apartment that you create makes the next one easier. But it's a little bit of, being there, sustaining yourself so that you can be in the right place at the right time when kind of the tipping point happens. But it does take time. This is not for the impatient people, this industry. And then on challenges, I mean, I think the biggest challenge outside of just market adoption and the time that it takes and the persistence that it requires, I would say, is the understanding that we all tend to completely underestimate how hard it is to figure out the operations around a new innovation. Meaning, designing the supply chain, installation processes, quality control processes around how you show up in a building with 200 of these big systems with a lot of boxes, and all the process around that, and how you do that at the right cost, at the right quality, at the right speed. I would say that's 10 times harder than designing the product itself. And that cannot be, like ignored, and that's the type of journey you have to go through. The good news is that once you do it, it's not something so easy to replicate. It's not an app or something where, somebody could see a functionality and in a few weeks they could basically create something similar. It's something that, takes time to build, but once you do, it's a much more protectable kind of feature. At the end of the day, real estate, it's about, multi-decade kind of generation of value. And that's how you have to think about changing cities, changing real estate. It takes time, and it's not for, again, easy, quick wins. It's about really thinking of real estate cycles as things that take years at a time.
Are you just in the North American market? I know you mentioned a couple of North American cities, or are you in markets?
So we're in Canada too. We're in Toronto. We're looking at Montreal. So North America. Outside of that, we're warming up to Japan quite a bit because we have Japanese investors. So we're looking at it more seriously now. And also we've looked not as seriously, but we looked at NEOM too and Dubai. So, Middle East, big cities. Of course, NEOM is still very, very early, but a lot of density is coming that way. We look at Dubai. So there's some interest there that we're kind of interested in, but just kind of looking at it still from afar. But Japan, if I had to choose a market outside of North America where this makes all the sense in the world and where we are taking some steps to kind of position ourselves there, that's Japan. Even our brand comes from Japanese, so you can see the obvious kind of connection there.